Hello, and welcome to Real Actors, Real Answers, the video podcast where you are the star. Today, I am thrilled and honored to talk to Steve Stoliar, as in stole your hat. He is, I'll just say it, and I'll let him field everything. He's the star today. He knew Groucho Marx, one of the Marx Brothers. He has a great story to tell, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Steve. Hello, Steve.
Howdy. Glad to be on your show. Yes, I knew actually 3 of the 5 Marx Brothers, which isn't a bad score. Chico and Harpo had died when I was a kid, but I got to know Groucho, I got to know Zeppo, and I got to meet Gummo on a couple of occasions. They were the 2 straight men in the early days of their act. And I have the distinction of being able to say that Zeppo and I dated the same girl. She was 19, I was 20, and he was 74.
Oh, well, really?
We are perhaps getting ahead of ourselves. So right. I will let you lead the chronology here.
Okay. So, when did you start in show business?
Well, let me see. When I got the job working for Groucho, I was a UCLA student and a history major. And I figured I would probably I'd always had an interest in paleontology and archaeology and world history. And so I figured I would, I guess, teach. I don't know how you make a living with a history degree, but I always had an interest in movies and comedy. And I seemed to have a fairly decent sense of humor. I was voted class clown in high school in our class of 1100. So I was dependable to come up with a quip or a pun. And I seemed to have a flair for doing impressions, sometimes of friends and family members, but sometimes of character actors and people I saw on TV. But I didn't really think that there was room for me in show business because I thought the odds of that are astronomical. Again, as if being a history major was a road to having a platinum paved road. Working at Groucho's and immersing me in that atmosphere made the gravitational pull towards show business almost inescapable. And I realized I really did, I really did want to somehow be a part of that. I really felt at home, particularly around Groucho's writer friends. And my roommate at the time, never buy your teeth through the mail, and I were trying to write sketches and just kind of dip our toe in the water. But I don't know whether working for Groucho constitutes show business. I was his secretary and archivist. And then after he died, I worked at Universal in the steno pool from 11 to 8 every day, typing on a Selectric 2, Rockford Files, Columbo, Kojak, Beretta, all of the then current TV shows, and still thinking I'm closer, but I'm still not really a part of this. And I got to know, here's where the name dropping starts. So put on your galoshes. I became friends with Dick Cavett through my Groucho work. And Cavett hired me to come to New York and write for him at HBO, which was a fabulous experience because it's like I left LAX basically a secretary and touched down at JFK, this writer from California that Dick wants on the show. And eventually work dried up in New York, and I got an offer from my former boss when I was a production secretary at Universal, asking if I would write for his show. So it meant really reluctantly moving back to Los Angeles because I loved Manhattan, and working on a short-lived TV show called codename Foxfire, which was a great experience. And it was very strange being back at Universal with a secretary instead of being a secretary. Very odd. And I had known her when we were both in the steno pool. So it was very strange saying, can you get me some more coffee and make 2 copies of the script? And then freelanced after that, Murder, She Wrote, and Simon, and a few episodes of Sliders and the new KRP in Cincinnati. And I also, my flair for voices came in handy because I started doing animation and radio stuff. Did a lot of stuff for Bill Melendez and the Peanuts gang, which was wonderful.
Oh, that's amazing. Did you meet Mr. Schultz?
I didn't meet him, but I have the distinction of having a writing credit on the only Peanuts special that Schultz doesn't get complete credit for. You're in the Super Bowl, Charlie Brown, because they had, the way you usually do it is you record all the voices first, and then you animate it to that. And then everything's locked in. But unfortunately, once they had strung together all the stuff they had recorded and all the animation, I got a call from someone I knew who was working there saying the new special doesn't make sense. There's these long stretches with football games with teams of birds running back and forth on the field, and you can't tell what's going on. Can you write and record narration like a sportscaster to describe the action? So I had to sit, I didn't have any sophisticated equipment. I sat with not a stopwatch, but just my wristwatch and a VHS copy of the finished show to make sure that I wasn't forcing myself to say, and he passes the ball, and he scores. I didn't want to have to do that, but I also didn't want to have long stretches where, and he's running, and still. So that was really challenging. But then I went in to record it, and Bill Melendez always did the directing himself, and that was great because he was such a great down-to-earth guy. I have found that many of the legendary people in show business and the art and literary world are really regular guys and down-to-earth and no ego. And it's the hungry, young, rising stars that have the "I don't think you realize who I am" syndrome. That I found that out at Groucho's, that I loved, that it was really comfortable for me to be with his older set of friends. But then Erin Fleming, who was the young actress who was in charge of Groucho's life, had a coterie of younger friends, younger performers, and I kind of found them quirky and I just didn't feel as comfortable with them as I did with the people that wrote Groucho's movies and worked on his TV show. So I didn't meet Schultz, but I do have, as a result of my having helped out on that show, I have a first edition of Snoopy and the Red Baron, in which Schultz drew a Snoopy and signed it. And he didn't come down that often to meet with Bill Melendez, so it wasn't like you were likely to run into him. But Bill was a great guy, and his, before he did the Peanuts specials, he was at Disney in the 40s and Warner Brothers in the 50s. So he was there for the golden age of these 2 landmark animation studios, and then he went out on his own. And the Christmas special was just supposed to be a one-off. The animation cells for it don't even have a production number because they didn't need to keep track of it, because that was it was just like, all they are numbered is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 instead of 63072 dash, because they didn't think there'd be anything besides Charlie Brown Christmas. So it was kind of a family atmosphere there. They occupied 3 old cottages in Larchmont Village in Hollywood. And it was always really low key and low pressure and high enjoyment. So I was happy doing those. those things. Did I answer any part of your question?
Yes, and more, and
Oh,
more.
then we're done here.
Hope not. Um, you wrote for Murder, She Wrote. Did you meet Angela Lansbury?
You know, you'd think I just have a yes or no question answer for that. I did not meet her in connection with having written that, because as a freelancer, you come in and you meet with the producers and you pitch ideas. And if you're lucky, then one of them appeals to them. Then you go home and work it out as an outline for a story. Then you bring it in and they say, yeah, but how about if we go this way? Why don't you go home and rework it? And then you do the first draft and turn it in. But you're not really on the set. It's sort of after the fact. You've served your purpose by giving us the script and we'll take it from here. However, since I had worked at Universal in the steno pool and as a production secretary, I knew all of the middle-aged ladies that I would see wandering in and out of the different buildings, because had sat next to some of them at the typewriter or interacted with them when I was working there or as story editor on Foxfire. And so I was about to go into the producer's building one day and the double glass doors opened and this familiar woman came out. And I looked at her and I said, "Hi." And Angela Lansbury said, "Hello," and continued. And I realized it was one of those things where when you see someone out of context, your algebra teacher at the grocery store or someone you went to camp with driving next to you or something like that, and you think, I can't remember, are you the check stand person I always go to at the store, or are you a nurse at one of the doctor's offices I went? You don't have time. There's just recognition. So as she came out, my mind said, one of the ladies you used to work with. But Angela Lansbury said hello. So that is why I can't just say yes or no to having met Angela Lansbury. But I'm very proud of the episode I wrote. And it ended up being the last time that Robert Sterling and Ann Jeffries worked together. And I knew them from co-starring on the Topper television series when I was just a little boy. They played the two ghosts who haunt Leo G. Carroll.
I remember that show.
Yes, they were. She was the ghostess with the mostess, and Jeffries, and they were a long-time Hollywood couple. They acted in a number of things together, but I didn't get to meet them because I wasn't on the set for that. But I was often on the set of different shows that I had no business being there for, because I never stopped being a fan. And so I never understood why the other people in the steno pool just looked at it as a job. They punched in, they did their work, they took their lunch break, they left. The idea of being on the Universal lot and being able to wander around and go to the stage where Cheney Sr. filmed The Phantom of the Opera and the balcony seats are still installed there, and it was used over the years for musicals and other films and TV shows where there was a scene in a theater, just to go wandering around. But I would also try to find out who was guest starring on different shows, because I didn't really care that much about the then current, I didn't care that much about Lindsay Wagner or Lee Majors or Robert Blake, but the guest stars. So because of the guest stars, I got to meet Fred Astaire on the set of Battlestar Galactica, of all of the unlikely places to cross paths with Mr. Top Hat, White Tie, and Tails. He was in a silver spacesuit. And he was doing it because his grandson, it was his favorite show, and he said, "Grandpa, why don't you do that show?" So they called up the producers, and Glenn Larson had a script fashioned where he played Dirk Benedict's con artist father. And so I got to meet him and chat briefly with him. I met Lauren Bacall on the set of The Rockford Files. an episode where she was guest starring and ended up winning an Emmy. And she was kind of a handful, which I knew, but still wanted to meet her. So I sort of, made the best of things while I was just a drone there. And I've never really lost that feeling of being a fan of so many people. And or when I was working at Groucho's, when the tour bus would stop, if I was in the kitchen, I would wave through the window, assuming that someone in the tourist van would think someone waved. It could have been Groucho Marx. I don't know, because I always had sort of one foot in that van with those fans, thinking, just think he lives there. Will we catch a glimpse of him? So I always and in fact, with Dick Cavett, who became a good friend of mine, he never really stopped being that kid from Nebraska that can't believe they're paying him money to talk to Bob Hope and Fred Astaire and Katharine Hepburn. He hasn't lost that, which I think is charming, and I can relate to that because I've never gotten jaded or, oh, well, once you get into it, you realize it's no big deal. It's like it was to me at Universal when they were one of those people from the golden age. I often saw Hitchcock being driven in a dark green Lincoln Continental. He would be in the back in his chauffeur. And shortly after he was knighted, Lou Wasserman, who was the head of MCA Universal, threw a luncheon in Hitchcock's honor in the commissary. And I happened to be running an errand on the lot and walked past the side of the commissary just as the door of the executive dining room opened. And this tall, tan, white-haired man with black-rimmed glasses exited, and Cary Grant beamed a smile at me. And I felt like a middle-aged housewife with her hair in curlers. Oh, my God, Cary Grant smiled. And yet it's like you can't tell me that, hey, he was just some guy that lucked out. No, he was bathed in the magical glow of movie cameras in the 30s and 40s, and that sets these people apart.
It does. There's so much that you have, so much gold that you have freely offered today. Now, when you started to work with Groucho Marx, how many years was it? And tell me a little bit about that collaboration.
Well,
every day.
I worked for him the last 3 years of his life. He was in frail health, and I was always expecting the pumpkin to turn, or the coach to turn back into a pumpkin at any moment. I never took any of that for granted, and really was astonished to realize that I had lasted as long as I did, especially with the aforementioned Erin Fleming in charge of the household, because she was a very mercurial, difficult woman with deep psychological problems. And she hired and fired people often with no reason, just kind of paranoid. So somehow I managed to remain in Groucho's employ all the way until his death. But I won't say that we were friends. I could inflate my importance because there's no one around to say he's lying, but I don't need to. And then I wrote a book about it called Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House. And I had the same feeling when I was writing it. I am not going to make more out of me than I deserve. I'm not going to play up people that had strong negative things and not get into that. And I'm not, I wanted to try to tell it as I saw it. So I would say that Groucho liked me and was fond of me, sort of like an uncle. And he told others what a good job I did, which was very flattering because that's being told to someone else, so it has more of an authentic ring to it than if he said it to you. But it was a literal dream come true, because I used to dream about meeting Groucho, and they would be so vivid, and in the dream I would think, this time it's not a dream, he's really there, I'm talking to him. And then as it would start to dissipate and I'd start to wake up, I'd think, God, shit, fuck, piss, it's I fooled myself again. And I thought, I'm never going to meet this guy. He's old and frail, and I'm just this punk in college. And through an extraordinary set of circumstances, which involved starting a campaign to get Animal Crackers re-released. That's what brought us together, because it hadn't been seen in decades and wasn't part of the syndicated package of old Paramount films that MCA cycled through on TV, because it had basically a legal snag where the copyright hadn't been renewed, so it reverted back to the authors of the Broadway play. But for my friends and I, who were rabid Marx Brothers fans, it was the great missing link, holy grail. They only made about a dozen movies, and Animal Crackers was their second, and Groucho played Captain Spaulding, and that's where the elephant in my pajamas line. But people hadn't seen it. So I started this petition drive on Bruin Walk at UCLA, and Groucho came. His publicity people arranged for him to come to school. And I said, Groucho, I'm very happy to be meeting you after all this time. And he said, well, you should be. And Erin Fleming said, this is SteveStoliar. He's the one trying to get Animal Crackers re-released. And Groucho said, well, so did you get it? And I said, not yet, but we're working on it. And Groucho said, well, you better or I'll fire you. Ooh. And I said, really? I didn't realize I was working for you. How much are you paying me? And he said, a little less than nothing. And my heart is like pounding out of my shirt that I'm talking to the man. I never thought I'd shake his hand. And then Universal relented and spent the money to clear the rights. And they brought the movie out, and they were just going to run it at one theater in Westwood and one in New York and be done with it and not have to worry about people pestering them about this old movie. But it ended up breaking the house record at the UA Westwood that had been set by the French Connection several years earlier. So it was very gratifying for me to be in a coffee shop and see this long line of kids in tennis shoes and T-shirts and blue jeans standing in line to see this 1930 Marx Brothers movie. And so when the campaign ended and I had a couple of summer jobs fall through and my dad yelling at me, I don't want you sitting on your fanny all summer. Go see if Taco Bell needs someone or dishwasher. And it's like, I don't want to be a dishwasher. And so I figured I had nothing to lose, and I called up Erin Fleming and I said, is there anything at all that you think I'm a... And she said, well, actually, I used to be Groucho's secretary, but now I'm his manager, and the fan mail's been piling up. And we need someone who knows their Marx Brothers to organize all of his memorabilia. And I'm thinking, oh, God, please, oh, God, please, oh, God. And sure enough, I was hired. And I thought it would be working in an office building and he'd come in once a month to sign checks or something. She said, oh, no, dear, you'll be working right in his house. There's a room you can use as your office and you can make your own hours. And I thought, and they're paying me to do this. And so I got to spend real quality time with my longtime idol. I was always welcome at the table. There wasn't a sense of the help will eat in the kitchen. There was no. So if it was just Groucho or Groucho and Erin or Groucho and a nurse, I would be there. Or if it was George Burns or Jack Lemmon or Steve Allen or Hal Cantor or S.J. Perelman. Yeah, I mean, it was mind-blowing being a fly on the wall for conversations. When Burns came over, it was before Sunshine Boy, so it was before that whole renaissance in his career. But because I was such a fanatic about old movies and comedies, I certainly knew full well about Burns and Allen and their radio and TV and films and all. So I was jazzed about meeting him, even though he wasn't hot again yet. And so the doorbell rang, and I went to get it, and I was nervous. And this little man, and he looked up and he said, "Hi, you want to live a long time? Become an actor. You'll live to be an old man like Groucho and me. Okay, let's eat." And we went to the table, and I just sat and watched the two of them talking. Groucho saying, "You remember B.F. Keith's theater in Milwaukee was where Chico was screwing the dog?" "No, that wasn't Keith's theater. That was the Orpheum Theater in Chicago." And it was sort of like the Sunshine Boys, except it didn't exist yet. And then after lunch, Burns took out a cigar and pushed it into the plastic holder. He said, "I never smoke expensive cigars. All I care about is if it fits the holder. Milton Berle pays $2 a piece for his cigars. If I paid that much, I'd go to bed with it before I'd smoke it." And again, that's just one snowflake in a blizzard of stories and experiences I had that stayed with me. And actually, towards the end, there was a very bitter fight over Groucho's conservatorship between Groucho's son Arthur, from whom he was estranged, and Erin Fleming, who all sorts of stories had come out from former nurses about how abusive Erin was. And I certainly witnessed verbal and emotional abuse. And we wished that we could have subtracted her from the equation and added someone just as good, but we were worried that Groucho had grown so reliant on her that might have more of an adverse effect. But I was actually at one point put in charge of the household on weekends, and I was actually responsible for saying to Erin Fleming, "I think it's time you leave now," which she was like Cruella de Vil, just, "How dare you? I hired you. You're just a servant." And it's like, well, but the judge gave Nat Perrin the right to assign who he wanted to be in different positions until they picked a permanent conservator, and Nat wants me here. And I was sort of a referee between these two warring factions, because Groucho's, it's like the people who were still close to Arthur and Groucho would visit in the morning and afternoon, and then Erin and her coterie of friends would visit in the late afternoon and evening. And I was supposed to keep the ships from slamming into each other. So it was, but I was happy to do it. I realized how fortunate I was, not just to have been able to meet Groucho and work in his house and hear all these stories and meet all these people, but here I was going from a guy who helped with the fan mail to protecting him in his last months from stress and adversity. It was a lot of responsibility for a kid in his early 20s, but somehow we managed, and it just was a life-changing event.
That's wonderful. I'm honored to have you on my show. About your book, Where can I buy a copy? Where can people buy a copy? I've got to get one.
Why should I tell them? Keep it between us. Well, hold on a second.
Okay.
Now I'm a prop comedian.
Okay. And there it is.
That is the book, Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House. Introduction by Dick Cavett, and Woody Allen said it was one of the best books about a show business icon he'd ever read, which astonished me and pleased me. It is available as a book, or as a Kindle, or as an audio book with me doing all the voices and narration, which can be found on Amazon. Or if you or one of your listeners, or both of them, I know it always gets me when it says like the reader is instructed to look, and it's like, are they only assuming one person's going to look at this book? You can order a signed or personalized copy directly from me via my website, which is SteveStoliar, STOLIAR.com. And I would be happy to sign it however you wish and send it directly to wherever you consider your home address. So that is how people can get it, depending on what format they want.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Steve, how long did it take you, because I'm writing a book right now too, how long did it take you to write that book?
That's tough to measure because it was interrupted by the Northridge earthquake, which literally displaced my late wife and me and threw everything into turmoil. It was like someone had put quarters in the dryer, and our apartment, I had my first stitches ever because of broken glass flying, I think they said like 30 miles an hour or something. I had written like the first third, and it's interesting, I had just sent out the manuscript of the first third to a few potential agents. And then the quake hit, and I felt like Jor-El firing off the rocket from Krypton just before the planet explodes. Here's my book. Please see if you can do something with it. So it took a while for me to get my head back on straight where I could focus on. I had, I used the 3x5 card method of arranging the chronology because it so easily allows changing stuff around. But I basically wanted to do a chronological recreation of the events that happened. And I just remember going into the office and the cards, they would have been closer together if I'd stood there and sailed them out like a deck of cards. All of my bookshelves had dissolved in on themselves, and it was just a mountain of books. So, it was a colossal mess, and I still get rattled when a big truck goes driving down near my apartment building, because it's like the post-stress disorder of, is this another one? Is this when I die? No, the truck. Good, that's good. It took certainly, I would say, probably 6 months total, if you subtract the downtime for trauma. It was a bitch getting an agent and a bitch getting a publisher. I had well-intentioned friends when I first started on it saying, you won't have a problem with this. You had a front row center seat to the last days of a certifiable Hollywood legend. People want to read that. And I thought, oh, great. And it's like Dick Cavett's, one of his best friends was Chris Porterfield, who was one of the editors of Time magazine and knew publishers and agents. And I thought, this is going to be a hot knife and butter. I'm just going to slice through this. And I started getting rejection slips. And my cover letter said, this is not a biography of Groucho Marx. It's the story of a fan whose dream comes true. And I would get rejection slips that said, we're not interested in any biographies of Groucho Marx at this time. And I would think, you didn't even read the cover letter. You don't even. So that was very frustrating and demoralizing, because I thought, here I've put in the work. I've survived the Northridge quake. Please reward me by having the book become a reality. And that took longer. And I finally found an agent who got it and said, no, this is great, and I'd like to represent it. Then came the rejection slips from all the publishers. Well, we don't really do well with this. Well, you're not famous, so your memoir doesn't really, well, there are enough about, and I would be tormented going to the local bookstore now and again to see what was new, to see yet another book on Marilyn Monroe, like every month, or Elvis. There was just like being ground out. How many different ways were there to divvy up those lives? But no, we don't think there's any interest. One of them said, there's just not much interest in this grand but not very saleable dead celebrity. that went right through to my heart. Thank you for dismissing him as just a dead celebrity. This man who changed my life, who was my idol as an adolescent. But I stuck with it and eventually got a publisher, and then came out with a revised edition with a different publisher, Bear Manor Media, um, that had a new chapter at the end that sort of caught people up on all that had happened in the years since the initial book had come out, because there was like the reactions of people I wrote about, and a friend and I going back into Groucho's house when it was up for sale and how it had changed. And I felt like I was haunting an old house. It was very strange, interesting. So anyway, it is in print and available, and I'm fond of it, but then I wrote it, so what's that worth?
Absolutely. It's priceless, is what it is. Wow, that's beautiful. I love creativity is the best way to live, but sometimes, most of the time, it's challenging, you know?
Yeah,
It
you're
really
always
is.
having to prove and reprove yourself. More recently, the book was optioned, and then I co-wrote an adaptation, and it is in serious development. I mean, if it weren't for the writer's strike and the challenge of fully financing, we're all but ready to go with the film version, to be directed by Oren Moverman and starring Jeffrey Rush as the older Groucho. He is champing at the bit to play this role. He is so immersing himself and preparing for it that his wife said he is starting to exhibit elements of the elderly Groucho. He's walking a little bent over, more slowly, and he's a little more hard of hearing, which he wasn't before.
Oh
And
my.
that's how he is when he prepares for a role. But things are on hold right now. But it really is. It isn't just like an idea we're playing with. It's been budgeted, and I'm. It will of course be completely surreal for me to walk onto the set of a film that's based on experiences I had, starring people, playing people I knew, including someone playing Steve at 20 with mutton chops and a mustache and a full head of hair. That's going to be really strange, but really rewarding. So I'm jazzed about that, and have just learned over the year. I mean, it has been a real long and winding road trying to get a film version made. And there were times when I walked away from people because I just got a sense that we weren't on literally the same page. And then I had other people in the business saying, "You're an idiot. You never turn something down unless you have something else to go to." And my thinking was, no, I have one chance to trade in my cow for a handful of magic beans that hopefully will grow into a beanstalk. And it isn't just about getting some money for it or seeing something on the screen. I remember shortly after the initial book came out years ago, my agent at the time said there's a producer and he'd like to talk to you. And I thought, wow, it just came out and already this is happening. And I met with him, and the first thing he said was, "I loved your book, but if you think there's a movie in it, you're mistaken." And then he explained it needs to be Groucho's whole life story, and then you can bookend it with him telling you, and then you flash back. And it's like, no more than Ed Wood was Bela Lugosi's career. It was the end of his life when he was frail and old, and this impressionable kid, fanatic fan, and his relationship with him. I knew it's like, don't tell me this needs to be a Groucho bio. And then there was another director that a friend of mine arranged for me to have lunch with, and he was a big Groucho fan, and he was jazzed about this. And then he said, but the first thing we're going to have to figure out is whose point of view will the story be told through? And I was thinking maybe it should be the young Groucho imprisoned in the mind of the older Groucho, And I'm thinking, if you don't understand that young Steve is the one the audience will relate to going through that door like Dorothy into Oz and it turns technicolor, if you don't get who is telling the story, then our ships have split in different directions and are still sitting at the dock and we're that far apart. And that was the one where I just said thanks, but no thanks. And the friend that had arranged the lunch said, "You're out of your mind. He wants to do it." And it's like, I'm prepared for compromise. And I understand that books and movies are different creatures. You don't just change the tabs and retype the script. It's, a real streamlining and condensing time and characters. So I've been holding out for things to fall into place better, and they have, although we're still not quite there, but it's looking really good. And I'm, as you can tell, jazzed about the idea of seeing a piece of my life on the big screen. What a mind blower.
Yes, indeed. Wow. That's amazing. I'm very happy for you. I really am.
Thanks.
SteveStoliar.
Yeah.
I want to thank you very much for being on Real Actors, Real Answers. It's been an honor, a privilege. I can't believe I'm talking to you, but I am.
And I'm talking to you. You're welcome.
You have a blessed day, and I'm going to tell everyone I know about this book and, of course, this interview.
Well, I hope you know a lot of people.
I do.
Okay.
It's my business to know people. Just reaching out is what I love to do, especially when it comes to how I was raised, the golden age. My mother gave me a legacy, and she introduced me to real actors, real acting. That's why I know about Fred Astaire. That's why I know about Cary Grant. It's through her. And now I know you. So thank you.
My pleasure. It was totally painless. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.
All right, you too.